The past decade has seen a massive shift in what it means to be a total war game. In 2012, Shogun 2 Fall of the Samurai showcased how utterly epic and varied historical total war could be, with a mixture of the old and the new. The battlefields were utterly changed when katana-wielding samurai clashed against actual Gatling guns and professional Western rifle infantry, and the seas were never safe again when the ironclads showed off their steel armor. In 2013, Rome 2 had a rocky start, before it became the historical total war with by far the longest amount of support from CA itself. Rome 2 was a paradigm shift for the Total War series for better or worse, in that it brought on a completely new province system and a new way of portraying the campaign map. Rome 2 was in many ways the first actual massive Total War map, as even though some of the previous games were large indeed, Rome 2 was simply living on a different scale entirely. 2015 saw the last true historical Total War in Attila, much in the style of Rome 2, only improved, although we also received the smaller Thrones of Britannia in 2017, before 2016 saw the series truly embark on a new path. And since 2016, Total War has in many ways never been the same, as the Warhammer series not only brought untold amounts of fantasy over the course of 3 massive games and accompanying DLC, but the Warhammer series also influenced how the more historical titles actually functioned. Both Three Kingdoms and the Total War Saga Troy, while being awesome to various degrees in their own rights, do not feel like actual historical titles. Three Kingdoms is first and foremost built on a mythical and fantastical basis with demigod-like characters, and Troy is by definition located in a mythical setting with actual gods. The sense of the old Total War, for the lack of a better word, is largely gone, and likely won't come back until we actually have a new Total War game with a simple yet clear name, like for example Medieval 3. Now suffice to say, Warhammer 3 is supposed to be the last entry in the trilogy, and even though we likely have a dozen content packs headed our way over the next 2 years, CA is unlikely to leave the entire development team on Warhammer 3 alone. With this in mind, what might we even expect from Total War in 2023? Well, let's take a look at what we know for sure so far. In 2021, CA announced their departure from Three Kingdoms, but actually announced in the same breath the development of a kind of spiritual sequel to it. This mythical Three Kingdoms 2 has yet to be heard from, however, but since May 2023 will mark 2 years since said announcement, it's actually highly likely that Three Kingdoms 2 will be officially announced that year. Now we do know for a fact that this game is in development, but that is all. And yet, if this is the next big announcement from CA, then my disappointment will be immeasurable. Not because I don't want more fun in China, but because first having direct sequels in the fantastical Warhammer series, and then a consecutive sequel to the highly mythical Three Kingdoms, would be a slap in the face to the history fans who will have waited more than 8 long years for something new and fresh. And I'm not counting Rome Remastered here. And speaking of remasters, we do know that Feral Interactive, the team behind both Rome Remastered and the mobile versions of Medieval 2 and Kingdoms, are done with those projects. And they did an absolutely fantastic job, by the way. Now, I'm not the first one to say a certain pattern here. Once Feral was done with Rome for mobile, they went on to make Rome Remastered. And so, it seems something of a dream come true for them to begin developing Medieval 2 Remastered, now that the Medieval 2 mobile versions are done. But Feral is currently not working on anything Medieval 2 Remastered related, at least that's the last I heard. And so we can only hope that this changes in the near future. As much as I'd love something completely new and fresh, Medieval 2 still has one of the best foundations in Total War, and a remastered version could potentially be the best Total War game of all time, especially when you consider the amount of mods and types of mods we could get from this. Three Kingdoms and remasters aside though, what could Total War bring that's new and fresh? If anything at all, whether releases or announcements? Well, let's face it, since Warhammer 3 basically just released, it's rather unlikely that a whole new Total War game, again, unless it's Three Kingdoms 2, which is revealed, let's say in March for a September release or something, will actually come out. If we are looking at something massive and new in the historical vein, I think it's much more likely that we'll get an announcement and perhaps a trailer. CA themselves recently announced that they're on Christmas break right now, and that they will provide some updates for the future at some point next year. But what that entails remains to be seen. CA is absolutely aware that the last real historical game came out in the latter half of a decade ago by now, and considering that Warhammer 3 did after all release almost a year ago, by the time they make their statement for the future, it's not impossible that we'll get some cool news. The most sought after next Total War is likely Medieval 3 hands down. I can't really imagine anything else, although an Empire 2 might be second. But honestly, considering the mass appeal of the Medieval era, and the fact that the majority of the fans have been clamoring for it, I think Medieval 3 is the only real contender here. I can't be the only one who's imagined this game for the past 10 years or more who feels like Medieval, probably along with Rome, is the series' true firebrand and mainline series. I also think Medieval 3 could bring so much to Total War after all these years, considering that the Warhammer series is basically a fantasy renaissance game. With some tweaking and improvements to realism, what CA has done with Warhammer could easily be implemented in Medieval 3 as well, with everything from melee to musket firing infantry already present in the Warhammer games. I also think Medieval 3 could signal a brand new type of Total War game for CA, as both Empire and Rome 2 became. Medieval 3 could in many ways bring a paradigm shift to the series by innovating in city, government, and army management, hopefully bringing more depth and realism to the games. I personally would not be unhappy with a Rome 3 though, even though a Medieval 3 is much more likely, and honestly, much more needed. I do think a Rome 3 could do wonders as well though. After all, we are looking at a Rome 2 which in 2023 will be 10 years old, and for any other developer, that would absolutely warrant a refresh. Rome 2 is moreover a divided game amongst the fanbase, and even those who tend to have a mostly favorable view of the game, like myself after all these years and improvements, are often quick to provide a ton of downsides and areas with room for improvement. There's just so much that could be done to improve Rome 2, and a Rome 3, which is actually awesome on launch, would be very much welcomed. Now, I do not think a Shogun 3 is coming anytime soon. I've never really heard fans clamoring for it, and CA themselves have never come close to even suggest a Shogun 3 is in the works. But an Empire 3 is more likely, albeit not that realistic just yet. Empire 3 is arguably more niche than a Medieval 3, but would absolutely be welcomed with open arms from this channel. I'd love an Empire 3, as I believe there's just an entire world of improvements that could be made here, but again, I don't think it's likely right now, perhaps in 2026 or something. Total War has changed a lot in the past 10 years, but sadly, depending on who you are and what you like, many of these changes have not been here for the better. Total War has seen a shift from focusing solely on the historical to focusing mostly on the mythical or the completely fantastical, which to the old guard, myself included, is not optimal. I do think Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires is a great game, but it's not really my kind of Total War. And so, for 2023, if CA could find it in their hearts to finally grant this relatively old Total War geezer his wish, I'd be mightily happy. At the very least, hire Feral Interactive to make that Medieval 2 remaster. Thank you please. But what do you think Total War will look like in 2023? Will we hear of or get any new games at all? Or will 2023 be remembered as the first year in many without a single new Total War game? Let me know your thoughts below, and thank you so much for watching. Cheers!